Welcome to another episode of Philly Prime. This week, George Anastasia back on the show, journalist, author, teacher, all-around mob expert. We're going to talk about some of the funnier stories that we've come across covering the Philly mob over the past 25 to 30 years. I'm sure George has his whole bag full of them he's going to talk about. I have a few that'll get a chuckle or two, but George, just as an opener here, your thoughts down the years. There's been some funny stuff that has gone on in the Philly mob, or maybe it's serious with a little funny overture to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's both. I mean, and part of it is the personalities of the individuals. I mean, you know, the first really in-depth insights I got into organized crime was when I did the book about Nick Caramandi, Blood and Honor. And Caramandi was a con man and a great raconteur. I mean, he could tell tremendous stories.
Yeah.
But he also, it's almost a Norman Crosby kind of thing. I remember he was telling me about one of his earliest scams way back in the day, where he used to sell black and white TV sets and as color TV sets. And we go around, the neighborhood. And I said, Nick, how did you make people believe that these were color TV sets? And he said, well, because I had the brochures. I had all the brochures from a TV. I said, you mean brochures? Yeah, the brochures. I mean, that was Nick Caramandi, classic Nick Caramandi. He would stumble over a word, but he could run a con. He was a tremendous con man. And he told a lot of interesting and funny stories about getting over on people. That's what it was all about with those guys. And to do that, you've got to have charm and personality, and it's just almost a South Philly thing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, people ask me sometimes, what's the first time you ever met Joey Merlino? I mean, other than seeing him come home from prison in 1994 and seeing him in the old City Hall hallways when his dad and others in the Scarfo crew were on trial there in the late 80s. The first time I ever actually met him one-on-one and had a conversation with him came an hour or two after a press conference by the Philadelphia Police Department Homicide Unit after they tracked down a guy named Gaten Polidoro. And he was out driving around Philadelphia with a MAC-10 or an Uzi,
Right.
As part of the Stanfa Tura crew, whatever, more like the Tura crew. And they were looking to kill Joey Merlino. And according to the police department at this news conference, they caught Mr. Polidoro sitting at second in front down in that area with the gun in the car. And he was driving around looking for Joey and was going to shoot Joey. And my photographer at the time was Brad Now. I was relatively new back at Fox in Philadelphia after my years at Channel 10. And he said, let's go over to Merlino's house in Girard Estates and ask him what he thinks about this. So over we go. We knock on the front door. You can hear the dog barking at a nice Rottweiler, big dog, barking away. Didn't come to the door. We stepped off the front porch. We went across the street. Brad lines up the camera to get a couple of shots so we could say we went and asked him what he thought about this plot to kill him, and out comes Joey. Hey, what's up? Yells across the street. I said, Joe, you have a minute? And he goes, not really. And I said, well, I want to ask you a quick question. The police just held a news conference and said, there's a guy driving around. They just caught him with a MAC-10 trying to assassinate you. And he waves his hand like this and he goes, they're making that up. Leave that guy alone. He's not trying to kill anybody. And my partner and I looked at each other and we're like, okay. And he goes, have a good afternoon. Went back in the house, closed the door. First time I ever met Joey Merlino one-on-one.
Yeah, I mean, but you also got the classic Merlino line when they supposedly Scarfo from prison and put a $500,000 contract out on his life. This is after Scarfo Jr. was shot at Dante and Luigi's, and he and his father believed Joey was the shooter.
Right.
And God, you guys stopped and asked Joey about the contract, right?
Well, it was funny. You set that up real nice. Nicky Scarfo Jr. had been shot 7 or 8 times, right, inside Dante and Luigi's having dinner one night. The supposition was, never charged, that it was Joey Merlino who did it and then dropped the Uzi or MAC-10 out on the front step. That kind of thing. And then out comes this plot. Supposedly the FBI airs out for a $500,000 hit from prison by Nicky Sr. And we went over to talk to Joey, see what he thought about that. And as I said in the first show last week, he's a man of few words, and just quickly kind of looked at my partner Brad Now and I again and said, Give me the $500,000. I'll kill myself.
Yeah. I mean, that's classic. That's classic Joey. And he's
Off the
very,
cuff, off the cuff,
right.
it's straight up.
Very, and he also can be self-deprecating. I remember talking to him down in Florida after he was finally got out of prison after doing those whatever he did, 14
Yeah.
or whatever. And we were talking about the infamous armored car heist for which he was convicted and went to jail, and $350,000. Nobody ever recovered the money.
Fell off the back of a truck, right, George?
Fell out the back of a truck on Delaware Avenue. And a couple of Joey's associates ended up flipping and testifying against him because they alleged Joey kept all the money. And Joey that day was pretty open about it. I mean, he said what happened was, this was, I guess, in the 70s. It was about $350,000. He said he took it with him. He went on a plane. He said, I stuffed it in my clothes. And he said, because back then they didn't check you out. And he went, I think he said first he went to California, then he went to Vegas. And he said to me, he said, I was gambling and I had run it up to $500,000. And he said, by the time I got home, I took the cab from the airport. I had to go knock on my mother's door to get the cab fare. I mean, he blew all the money. I mean, it was a classic Merlino story, and it just Joey being Joey, and it goes back to, I mean, something Ronnie Previty always said about Joey. Joey's agenda on Monday was to get to Tuesday.
Yeah,
get the money, spend the money. Tomorrow we'll get more money. That was kind of it's almost a guys and dolls kind of approach that, and that's I think part of the charm of these guys is if you forget about or ignore the fact that they're out there killing one another, there is a certain panache to the thing. There's a, leave the gun, take the cannoli kind of thing with these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Ronnie Previty. Ronnie Previty was, in my estimation, one of the more fascinating guys that I ever met. And he would tell stories of himself about, he was, despite what people would think about Ronnie was a very strong family guy. He had 2 daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this one guy down in, I guess, outside Atlantic City, a card salesman, who was giving his daughter a hard time. And Ronnie wasn't going to let that go. And so I think he sent his buddy Freddie Aldridge to go to the car dealership and ask to take a car out for a spin. And he just dropped Freddie off. And since Freddie didn't have a car to leave, the salesman said, well, I got to go with you. So the salesman gets in the car and Freddie's driving down Atlantic County, ends up going on one of the Pine Barrens up a back road, this dirt road, and Ronnie's waiting in another car. And here they come, they pull up, and now the salesman's starting to look what's going on. And they pull up, Ronnie gets a blank pistol, and he says to the guy, get out of the car. And now the guy's sweating really.
Yeah, I bet he is.
Ronnie tells him, I don't want you near my daughter, I don't want you doing this again. And then he says, get in the trunk. And they put the guy in the trunk, and Ronnie says he fires the blank. The guy was just a nervous wreck. So then they slam the trunk down. Yeah. They drive away, they call the car dealership, and they say, hey, you got a salesman out here with such and such a road. You better go get him. He's in the trunk of the car. I mean, those are the kind of things that you can't make it up. I mean, and that was
serious but funny. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way these guys lived. I mean, it was almost nobody gets the last word on us. We're going to have the last word. And this was an example of Ronnie taking things into his own hands, looking out for his daughter. And I don't think that guy ever bothered his daughter again.
No, I bet not. That's part of the allure. You talk about Joey. You talk to anybody who's around Joey down in Florida and Boca or places like that, right, where he hangs out kind of thing. And people always say to me, why are these guys hanging around with him like that? I think, eventually, after a Coors Light or 2 or Zambuca, he tells a couple of nice stories. And he does have a certain kind of allure, and people are attracted to the guy and they want to spend time around the guy. You look at some of the people who spend time with him, these are big money people who travel in big circles down in Florida, and you see Joey right there. He's been playing golf at some of the best golf courses in Florida, including Trump's place.
Yeah, he's a celebrity in his own right. And J.R. Rubio said it best. And again, Rubio's another guy that they don't have any time for.
No.
But Rubio was down there working for the feds in Florida, and he got close to Joey, and he said, all these mob guys, these high-ranking mob guys, they all want to steal your money. They all want to take your money. He said, but Joey made you feel good while he was doing it. I mean, that's,
yeah.
And I think that says something about Joey Merlino. That's the way he is.
Yeah. Well, this Joey story too. Back probably in the mid to late 90s, Joey is in a casino down in Atlantic City. playing blackjack or something. I forget what he was playing at the time. And he's got a bunch of the guys around him, all dressed up real nice, behaving, kind of playing. And the cameras are rolling, eye in the sky, as they used to call it in the casinos,
Right.
capturing all this video, including then Joey finishing up and walking out kind of a little shaky, leaving with, I think, Marty Angelina, Stevie Mazzone, a couple of other guys walking out of the casino. And up comes the government saying, oh, Joey Merlino's in the casino. He's banned from being in the casino. He shouldn't have been in the casino. And here's kind of the tape to prove it. At Fox, we got the tape. So we went to see Joey and said to him, Joe, they just released this tape of you in the Atlantic City casino playing, and you and all the guys walking out. And he sits for a second. He's very quiet. And I'm like, oh, he's measuring his answer here. Let's see what he says. He's kind of in a little bit of a box. He's on tape in a casino. And he says, you ever seen that movie Forrest Gump? And I said, yeah. And he said, they put that guy's head on a bunch of people's different bodies and kind of made him a character like that. How do you know they didn't put my head on somebody? And he was totally serious. He didn't laugh. And he just kind of sat there with the answer and let it go. Yeah. And again, I kind of looked at my partner and I said, we're not going to top that answer,
Well, I remember talking to him about the Dante and Luigi shooting, where Nicky Scarfo, was a Halloween night in 1989, I guess. And Nicky Scarfo Jr. gets shot. And Joe has always been a suspect in that shooting. Never charged, always been a suspect. And Joey, with a straight face, said to me, well, it couldn't have been me because I was on supervised release and I wasn't allowed out after 7 o'clock. So I said, oh, okay. It's proof enough, I guess,
Yeah, like no mob guy's ever violated his supervised release.
Yeah, but he has a way of saying that that's almost charming, and it makes you roll your eyes but laugh. What are you going to say? How are you going to respond to that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We talked about this when Ralph Natale passed away, and it's funny how these guys say things, and they later kind of come back and haunt him a little bit. The first time I interviewed Ralph Natale was after he ran around his 4-mile trek around Cooper River Park over in Pennsauken.
Right.
And he sat down in the bleachers and we walked up to him with a camera rolling. We had taken some pictures of him running, and we walked up and we started talking. And his relationship out of prison with Joey Merlino was fresh right then. I think we're talking probably 95, 96. And I said, looking for a soundbite, what's your thoughts about Joey Merlino? And you remember this soundbite? He goes, well, if I was in a war, I'd want that guy in a foxhole next to me. And he said, he's a real man. He's a gentleman and he's a real man. But in a war, I want Joey Merlino in a foxhole next to me. That whole story changed years later when on the witness stand and testified against Joey and those guys. That was not the guy he wanted to be in a foxhole with anymore.
No, Raph got up on the witness stand and vilified all those guys after he had said all this other stuff. Raph was a con man in his own right. Whatever. Ralph was Ralph. Ralph was, I always say this, Ralph thought he was Don Corleone, he really was Uncle Junior. And that's the way it played out with him. So
yeah. George, any of the other, Ron Previty, you talked about him briefly. He was funny 24/7, that guy, when I was around him. He always had some quip, some line, something like that. Any other stories kind of with Ron Previty to kind of ring through with you?
Ronnie was this big guy, larger than life, but he was also, and people may not believe it, he was a ladies' man. And I would talk to him about that. And he said, the secret is to keep them laughing. He said, I make them laugh. He said, other guys go home with the Daily News. I go home with the broad. That's the secret. It's part of that world, part of that life that they were involved in. There was another, it's not always the wise guys. There was another case where Tommy DelGiorno, sometimes it's the lawyers that, I think this was Bob Madden who said this. He was a defense attorney. DelGiorno's testifying in the Scarfo case, and DelGiorno and Caramandi were in like protective custody. The state police were guarding him, and there was one day where the state police were driving DelGiorno back from a hearing or something, stopped at a bar, and DelGiorno and a hooker connected, and the state police let him go spend some time with the hooker before they took him back to wherever they were keeping him.
Yeah.
And as the I guess it was DelGiorno's testifying about this, and he's got to admit, that this happened, that I got, and Bobby Madden, I mean, without missing a beat, looked at the jury and then back at DelGiorno says, is that what they call doing a hard time? I mean, it just was a classic moment where, I mean, some of these guys were so quick.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you know, it resonated with the jury. I mean, DelGiorno and Caramandi ended up being really effective witnesses, but those guys both had a lot of baggage in terms of their lifestyles and the way they operated.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's funny, you know, I always say this about the guys in the Philly mob. A certain group of them don't play one chessboard at a time. They play like three. And they're very good at taking a situation and spinning it kind of the way they want it to go. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing. You know, we're going down one road with the story. They've got like three more roads to go down in their direction to get you off that one road.
Absolutely. And they're very good at that. I mean, it's kind of a street corner kind of stuff. I think a lot of it is street corner. These guys always survive on the street corner. That's the way they operate. Yeah. And again, it comes back to what I said earlier. Nobody wants to have anybody else have the last word. They want to have the last word. Yeah. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's serious, sometimes it's troubling, sometimes you laugh. But yeah, it's the world that they're in.
Yeah. Well, talk about Tommy DelGiorno. I have a funny story. When I was at Channel 10, after Tommy had completed all his testifying against the Scarfo mob and all that, someone reached out to me and said I could potentially come interview him along with his FBI handlers. And I can say it now because he's no longer with us. We traveled to North Carolina to a very nice golf course, rented a place there for 2 days, and the FBI brought Tommy DelGiorno to us, and we sat down for 2 days talking to him. Got real comfortable with the guy. He told all kinds of stories about killing a guy. Anybody can kill a guy. You take him out in a warehouse, tie him up in a chair, and put a bullet in his head. You know, a lot of braggadocio like that. At the end of the first day, he said, let's go. Why don't we go grab a bite to eat? There's a place around the corner. It's a real good spot. Let's go. It's a seafood place. Okay. We go, 3 FBI agents, my 2 camera guys and me. And Tommy's there. He had a couple cocktails, telling stories in the middle of the restaurant. When you walk in, we're in the main small room right in the front. People got to walk by us to get out into the restaurant. We're sitting there. He's telling stories like there's no tomorrow. And he says, let me tell you this story about Nicky Scarfo. And he says, we're down in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. We're at a real nice restaurant. There's like 16 of us sitting at the table, guys with their girls, whatever. Everybody's dressed up, suited up, because Nicky wanted everybody, you know, dressed appropriately at dinner. Nicky's got a white suit on. And he's sitting at the head of the table with a young lady, and everybody orders. So the waiter comes around to Nicky and says, what do you want? He says, I'll have the twin lobster tails. And he said, but one thing, I want you to tell the chef, I want him to take the lobster tails out of the shell, because as you can see, I got this white suit on. I don't want to get it all messy, and I don't want to be messing with it. Have him take it out of the shell. And the waiter's like, well, I don't know if he's going to do that, but okay. He goes, no, you make sure he does that. So off goes the waiter, goes back to the back. Out comes the food. Everybody gets their food. Nicky gets his last. Here come the twin lobster tails, but they're still in the shell. And Nicky says to the waiter, according to Tommy DelGiorno, after a couple of drinks, listen, buddy, I thought I told you to tell the chef to take those twin lobster tails out of the shell. And he says, well, I did. But he told me to tell you he doesn't do that for anybody. Nicky starts to fume. You can see the smoke coming out of his ears, according to DelGiorno. And everybody at the table is quiet because they can see how pissed off he is. And he says, Nicky says to Philip Leonetti, come down here, Philip. And Philip comes down. He goes, you take this guy and these 2 lobster tails back to the kitchen, and you tell that chef, take them out of those 2 shells right now and bring that back to me in a hurry. And it better still be hot. And if he doesn't, take them outside and do what you got to do. And the whole table kind of like froze up because they didn't know whether to laugh or to just be quiet. And I think the best move around Nicky Scarfo when he was pissed off was to be quiet.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, and somebody has verified that story for me through Philip Leonetti. But Tommy DelGiorno, 10 minutes worth of that story, up and down. He said nobody knew what to do when the night ended after that. You know,
would have been the lobster.
Yeah. And by the way, he did get his lobster tails outside the shell. George, just to kind of wrap this up. You know, these are serious matters sometimes. We're not trying to make light of them or anything like that. But as you cover these guys, things like this kind of pop up, and you know, you roll with the punches when they do. But at the end of the day, you know, as much as they make jokes about things and kind of slough things off and things like that, this is serious business for these guys. And it can be life altering and it can take your life. Is it just the bit of humor that they have to have in their life to try and keep going like this when you're in a business like that?
I don't
Humor
know.
makes it easier. I don't know.
I think from my experience that as you get to know these guys, some of them are funny, some of them are worth having a drink with, some of them are worth going to dinner with, and some are real jerks.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any different than lawyers that I dealt with, or prosecutors that I dealt with, or FBI agents that I dealt with. They're, you know, they're personalities, and there are guys who are genuinely likable,
Yeah.
despite what they do, and there are other guys that are a pain in the ass despite what they do, or because of what they do. It's
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I don't think wise guys are any different in terms of a stereotype than any other profession. But reporters, I mean, there are reporters you and I have worked with that some of them are funny, some of them are a pain in the ass. It's the same kind of thing with these guys. I mean, it is what it is. It's a personality thing. And I don't think it's unique to organized crime. Some of these guys are really self-deprecating and can tell funny stories.
Yeah.
And other guys just are jerks. That's
Yeah.
the nature of life, I guess.
I got to admit, George, some of the best times I spent with you and other reporters covering the mob were, you know, while we're in deliberations on some of these big trials, sitting out in the hallway with these guys, and you know, the guys who were not being held without bail or who were out there, or the lawyers. And so remember, we used to all go to lunch over at Pagano's.
Remember that? Yeah.
In along Market Street there, a couple steps from the courthouse.
Right.
And it was funny. We'd go in there and the defense lawyers would be at a bunch of tables. The reporters would be at a bunch of tables. A few of the mob guys would be at another table. And it was just kind of an odd thing to watch that happen. It was great food that Matt Pagano did a great job. That's why everybody went there for lunch. But if you remember those days, they were hilarious. Angelo Lutz would be sitting there over a cheesesteak telling some crazy story 10 feet from the prosecutors and 5 feet from the defense attorneys. It was just some funny moments, and sitting around talking like that was some of the more enjoyable times I had as a reporter. A little lighter note than the serious nature of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things I miss not being in the business. But as we said earlier, I don't know that that's going on anymore anyway. It's unfortunate what's happening with the media. Yeah. We had a really good run at a really good time.
Yeah, we did. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And that's why I think you and I are still friends all these decades later, George. you know, because those kind of relationships, they last, you know, and we love telling stories and talking about guys who told stories and putting them down on paper or putting them on TV, that kind of thing. But one of the things I always like to say is I cherish my friendship with you always, because we always had a free flow of kind of information like that. And some of it was funny, some of it was not, but the chuckles made it worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing here. It was, you know, we could never do that again. And I'm happy we were able to do it.
Yeah, I am too. George, thanks for coming on part 2 again, and great shows, both of them. And I really do appreciate you coming on. Open door, George. You come back anytime you want.
All right. Thank you. It's always a pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening again. That's Philly Prime for this week. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to George again for some really, really great stories, some funny stories, some serious stories, and some futuristic kind of stories. And George, thanks again for coming on. We'll see you next time.
Okay.